So hello, everybody. Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you are joining us in the world. Welcome back to our Central Laravel Developer Skills Series. We've had a little bit of a break since our last session. That was a little over a month ago. And that was with our CDO, Sylvan, talking all about why strategy matters and how you can start to interpret and even challenge your stakeholder needs. It was a really, really fantastic session. If you haven't had a chance to catch up on it yet, it is available on YouTube alongside our other two webinars so far in this series. So I'll make sure after the webinar today that I send an email out with a link to that playlist so everyone can catch up. But let's get on to today because we've got a really, really fantastic session planned. So firstly, for those who are new, my name's Dan. I'm your host for this series of webinars from Cyberduck. We've got a little bit of a different approach today. So we're going to have more of an informal fireside chat styled webinar. It's going to be led by our solution architect, David. We'll be getting stuck into the topic of UX and building products, whether it's websites, apps, tools that people actually want to use. This will be with our UX lead, Meera. So super excited to hear what they've got to say. Just going to do a couple of introductory and house rule slides. And this will also just give a chance for everyone to join before we get into the main section of today's webinar. So for those who are new, welcome to Cyberduck. It's always great to have new people joining our webinars. We're actually Laravel's first official UK accredited partner. And if you were to ask us, why do we do what we do? Well, we are super, super passionate about making websites and digital products and digital services more accessible and more user-friendly and served by better open source technology like Laravel. You can see on this slide here a few of the different kind of clients that we worked with. They've got really, really fantastic stories. So again, after the session today, please check out our website in our client stories, and you can again learn a little bit more about the different kind of projects we've done. And I guess that nicely brings us on to this series of webinars that we've kind of started to do. So actually we're in our fourth webinar now in this Essential Skills series. And, we've been around for 18 years now. And actually, if you collectively took all of our knowledge from different departments, it's much, much, much longer. And over these years, we've been building up these skills, these expertise, these processes, and really we just want to share it with the wider world, and particularly with developers who are looking to grow and elevate those skills outside of pure development. So what this is going to look like is in each of these sessions that we're running, we're going to have one of our ducks, or actually in this case, two of our ducks, focusing on sort of a different stage of the project lifecycle. So we've already done talks on pitching and on strategy. Today, we're going to be getting into UX, and then going forward, we'll be talking about things like accessibility, QA, and much, much more. We do make sure that all these sessions are recorded. And as I said already, we upload them to a YouTube playlist. So if you ever miss one, you can't make it, don't worry. We always make sure these are emailed out to everyone the following week from the webinar. And occasionally we'll also follow up with an additional piece of material kind of when it's relevant to the topic, such as an article, a white paper, or again, another previous webinar that we've done. And I think with that being said, it'd be really great to actually meet who our experts are today. So I'm going to start with good afternoon to Meera. How are you today? And could you tell our audience a little bit about what you do at Cyberduck?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Dan. So yeah, my name's Meera. I'm a UX lead at Cyberduck. I've been at Cyberduck now for 5 years. So it's been a while. Previously, I come from a background that has nothing to do with technology or with design. I was actually in banking and the payments world, so more on the client and the product side. I have a very commercial background, looking at pricing and financial modeling. So yeah, it's a completely coming from a completely different world, but I've developed a good understanding of what do businesses look for? What do stakeholders look for? What do you do when you have competing needs in an organization? And this has been really useful, bringing it into the world of user experience, bringing those problem solving and analytical skills into that. Of late, a lot of my work has been focused on the problem uncovering rather than just the problem solving side of things. And that's been amazingly useful. So yeah, that's me.
Thank you so much for that. And David, good afternoon. Again, how are you today? And yeah, can you tell us a little bit about your experience? Because I think that'd be really of interest to our audience as well.
Yes, 100%, Dave. Thank you. It's a wonderful day here in Surrey. The sun is shining, the sky is blue. So that's always good. I'm Dave Murray, as mentioned. I'm a solution architect here at CyberDuck. I have 30 years, so adding to that list of experience you were talking about, of experience in IT. I started off actually as a network engineer, and I was doing third line service support for a while. This was a perfect segue into started up a small agency as the CTO, which I ran for several years with a mate of mine. Exited when we were relatively small, about 25 or so. But it was a fantastic time at which I was involved in all elements of the business. So everything from new business development, implementation, delivery, etc. Understanding business models as well. What are our clients exactly trying to do? So I bring that knowledge to CyberDuck and I help our clients here. That's what I do. I do needs translation, both for developers on the back side of things, as well as trying to interpret sort of technical issues and technical solutions for our clients and providing the best type of composable architectures for them.
Okay, thanks so much for that. So I'll hand back over to you, David, in a minute. I've just got 2 more slides to go through and then we'll get stuck into the chat. So we've got about 40 minutes or so for the webinar today. I have about 20 to 25 minutes for the kind of slides and the loose questions we've got. As I said already, it's going to be more of an informal conversation with David and Meera. But then after that, we're going to open it up to your questions. So, you know, please do ask our speakers anything we'd like to. So the best way to do this is using the Q&A window. So if you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see a little Q&A button. You just click that, the window will pop open for you there. As I said already, the recording will be sent out to you early next week. And feel free at any point to share anything on social media. We love to see your tweets or LinkedIn posts. If you use the hashtag LaraDuck, we can then pick up on those and give you a like, a retweet, or a share. Captions are available if you need them. So we use automated captions. If these aren't already turned on, you can switch these on via the transcript button located at the bottom of your screen. And look, we all know automated captions, they're good, but they're never going to be perfect. So we do make sure that the on-demand versions of the webinars will be provided with manually edited captions as well. And that's everything from me for now. So I'm going to now pass on to David for you to take away.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. So Meera, thank you again for your time. It's great to get access to a mind like yours for this. As mentioned, I've also been involved in sort of end-to-end. And one of those almost elusive elements that keeps popping up is UX. So I think, you know, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page and we know what we're talking about, 2 things. What is UX? And the second thing is, does it really make a difference? You know?
Yeah, no, all fair questions. So yeah, there's a lot of terms that are being thrown out, you know, in the world of UX. So and some of them are used quite interchangeably. So broadly speaking, user experience is everything that covers the end user's interaction with a company, but also the services and its products. User interface, which is another term that's often used, is that point of interaction between, say, you as a person and the system. It could be a screen or anything. So that's the interface in itself. Another term that's often used is usability. So, you know, a better UX, better usability, and usability is a quality attribute. So it's specific attribute of that interface, and it covers, you know, whether the system is easy to learn, whether it's easy to use and efficient to use, whether it's pleasant, you're able to find what you're looking for. So usability covers all that, but user experience is more broad-based. Yeah. So in terms of whether it makes a difference, absolutely. So it's not magic dust, what you see there, but the main requirement for creating a really good user experience is to meet the needs of the users without fuss, without bother. And why? Because this creates engagement and stickiness, you know, and ease of use directly impacts your sales. A well-designed user interface, and this can include like a really good navigation, fewer steps to reach the page or the content that you're looking for, clearer direction through good calls to action, useful onboarding, and other patterns. They all can increase the conversion rate of your website. the visitors to the website can perform the action, the desired interaction, whether it's making a purchase or subscribing or reading something in a much more efficient way. Another way it can make a difference is also with lower costs and better processes, because a proper UX design allows you to stay within budget or even maybe cut costs of development. So for instance, prototyping, which is an intrinsic part of this, can help you estimate things more accurately. And I guess this might be close to your heart. You avoid feature creep, right? Adding lots and lots of unnecessary features that result in things that can blow your budget. And it can be prevented with the help of things like prototyping. So instead of relying on your inner sense, saying that this feature is amazingly and is super important, you use prototypes to test out and speak to people and understand how they react to your product, and you can make an unbiased decision. So yeah, there's lots of different ways in which it can lead to better processes. But beyond that, I think there are two things that you can't afford to ignore anymore. One is sustainability. So it's now a business imperative. You have Google making wide-ranging changes to its services and products, ensuring Maps offers carbon-optimized journeys, for instance. So how long will it be before search itself starts ranking sustainably designed websites higher? And regulations here. So from April 22, the UK's largest companies are now required to report on climate-related risks, including digital. And all of this will filter down to mid-sized companies, mid-sized websites, even small ones as well. And good UX design is sustainable design, reducing long user journeys, dead ends, unnecessary content, unnecessary page loads, and therefore data storage. Because so bad design and usability just worsens the environmental impact. And the last one is around accessibility. So, you have compliance in place now, you have regulation in place. It's come into force for public sector bodies. And accessibility guidelines now cover intranet and extranet websites for public sector. So there's lots of reasons why it can really make a difference, and you can't ignore it anymore.
100%. I think where it started to ring true for me is exactly what you're saying. Is we would have clients that we would bring to the site, amazing SEO, and our conversions weren't particularly good. And this was, our SEO was fantastic. We got all of those lookers, but we were just getting no bookers. And the reality is they couldn't achieve what they wanted to achieve on the site. And so it's a vital component of that. One of the reasons we put the series together was for developerpreneurs. So many of us in the community, the Laravel community, are pretty good at this. The way the world is developed, we don't need a massive DevOps team anymore. We don't have to do our own dedicated servers. It's all AWS built. It's pretty quick to scaffold your own systems. But you very quickly become aware that the tech side of it is just a tiny portion of that. If you're doing consulting work, or if you're working with smaller agencies, there's the business development, there's the client interfaces that you have to do. But on top of that is actually delivering for your clients. You can't handle that off to anyone else. They're paying you money. They want to see return on that investment. And you could build them the most beautiful site, but if it has no function or ROI, and it's not converting whatever your conversion metric is, that can be seriously problematic to your business and to the project as a whole. But also here, with the onset of sort of zero carbon footprints, etc., is, if people are, just to put it in more specific terms, if people are making less clicks, there's less callbacks on the server, there's less CPU running, less disk access, etc., which is reducing their carbon footprint considerably. So often people don't know, how can I, little Mr. Developer here, contribute to that? A really good way to do that, like you say, is having good UX. Less clicks, more focused, is less power being utilized. But now, tell me, Meera, are there any sort of, those are all very structured, tangible benefits. Are there any intangible benefits from UX as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, improved customer loyalty and retention leads to a stronger brand reputation, and you can't ignore that in terms of brand loyalty and brand recall. People talk about this. There's also the impact on internal teams. You have internal users, indirect users, who might find a bad user interface or poor design quite frustrating. So your salespeople who are trying to sell a product that is hard to demonstrate or explain or just show off. You'll have call center teams who are dealing with calls from people who can't find what they're looking for. They're not able to self-serve. And it's a waste of resources to build functionality into a product that customers aren't using, because there's no initial research done on understanding if people want that feature at all, or maybe that the system or the product is too complicated for people to take advantage of the features. And all of this has an impact in the morale of people working on the products. You want to build something that people use, that you're proud of as well. So yeah, absolutely.
No, 100%. I think that, one of the things of being a developer is you're always proud of what you build. And there can be nothing more deflating than building this beautiful creature that nobody uses. It's very soul destroying. So I hear you. That's definitely something I agree with. So if you haven't previously used UX and you want to get going, how should one plan to start? Is there a difference in greenfield versus legacy projects, large versus small projects? Is there any difference in those?
There is difference, and you have differences in approach, but in terms of when you should start, it's as soon as possible. I'd say as soon as possible across the board. So with something like a new product or a new website, a greenfield opportunity, it's the perfect opportunity to start with, say, some exploratory or what we call generative research, which helps you identify and define the problem that you're designing a solution for. Because what nobody wants is to create something that no one actually needs or uses. So yeah, I mean, you have an opportunity to set the tone, to find out who your target audience is, to set up things the way you want to go on. And so, yeah, with legacy systems, it depends on the scale of the problem. Why are people doing this in the first place? What's driven the need for reviewing and evaluating your user experience? What's driving these efforts, as well as the available budget and the resources? And it may seem daunting. So we often say, start with small things and build on this. So for instance, for a content-heavy informational site, so something that may not be very transactional, this could mean identifying a section of the site to focus on, like an exemplar, and you work on this. You do better content design there, better usability, better laying out of different blocks, and you show what this could look like. You build that exemplar. For something that's quite feature rich, you might identify some key customer journeys, again, based on some quick guerrilla testing, speaking to a few people, maybe looking at data that you already have, maybe speaking to your customer services to say, okay, what are the kind of things people have been complaining about? And you might focus on a single customer journey end to end, look at that and try and fix it. And you'll start seeing results soon enough. Because one of the challenges with a lot of legacy systems is you have a lot of teams working on different parts of it. So you need to bring people together, but that's often quite difficult. So if you start somewhere and use user experience as a bit of a Trojan horse to introduce that what good looks like, and then start rolling it out to different parts of the business, that could be an approach that could work quite well as well.
I think that makes perfect sense. I think when you have those legacy systems, the chances are you have a better idea of what's going wrong, because like you say, you will have had report back from customer services. If it's back-end systems, as we all know, are notoriously bad in the UX side of things because it's been left to the devices of some technical person who hasn't got UI or UX experience, and he's just throwing in that checkbox where it makes sense to drop it in, whereas it can have massive upticks, and just the changing of that type of a placement can make a massive difference in somebody's life. So it's small little incremental changes and growing from there.
Yeah, and you don't often have to start from scratch. You can see what others are doing. There's lots of common usability patterns, good usability patterns. There's a lot of good research out there on how you can improve. There's a lot of free resources. There's and how to make your site more accessible. There's code out there. There's things that you can start. But I always say, no matter where, start with developing a good understanding of your audience and what you're trying to achieve. I think that's probably key, because it gives you that laser focus and it helps you prioritize your efforts. So again, you don't start going down towards old habits where you're like, okay, let's throw in this feature, let's throw in that feature. Does it solve that fundamental problem for users?
Brings discipline. Yeah,
it does bring discipline. Yeah,
brilliant. So now that we know you can sort of start anytime, and it doesn't matter whether it's a sort of legacy or a greenfields project, can you give us a sort of overview of what it would look like, that process? How does that evolve within a development lifecycle?
So, I mean, there's lots of different approaches. So rather than a strict process, like I said, it does depend on what you're trying to do. But at a high level, you start with what we call the define and discover stage, where the goal is to understand the problem. So from a business perspective, making sure you bring a common understanding of what you're trying to achieve. You interrogate the brief. What are the shared goals that as a business you're trying to achieve? What problems are you trying to solve? But also importantly, why? So often what we've discovered when we're working with clients is that the problem they come with is often not the underlying problem. So you have to kind of dial back and keep asking why. Why is it an issue? We're here to redesign a site. Why are you here to redesign a site? What's prompted this? So it's sort of trying to understand what sits behind some of these things. And then also trying to understand what do you have available, because you have to be practical. What are the resources? What's the budget? Because there's no point trying to do something at a massive scale if you don't have the buy-in, if people are not ready to invest in that change. Culturally, you're not at the right place. So, and your approach may have to change. Maybe you need to do things in a piecemeal basis rather than a big bang approach. So I think there's a certain amount of business analysis and an understanding, like a common understanding that you need to bring in to start with. There's also the user perspective, who is the audience? Do we have enough of an understanding? So you might need to do some pre-discovery to understand who your audience is. What are their needs and motivations? What are the pain points? What are their frustration? And maybe you're coming in with some hypothesis already because your customer services team or your analytics have already said, a lot of people are dropping off at this point. This is what we hear. Everybody talks about not being able to log in, not being able to do something. So you might have certain hypotheses that you could start looking at. And there are a number of research methods, whether it's interviews, surveys, maybe some ethnographic research where you go and observe people doing things. So if it's like a physical product or something around service design or, utilizing a physical space, you can go watch people do that. You can look at your analytics. So there's a whole range of things that could help you understand the problem much better, because that's vital before you go down to the solving the problem route. So that the next stage is the design, the addressing of the problem. And this could be multi-layered. There might be quick fixes. There might be some things that might take more time, or some cases you might need to go back to the drawing board and maybe you need to do more research. But you need to bring everybody along on this journey. So while in the define and the discover stage, the UX or the research team might be taking more of a lead. It's important that the development teams also involved, so you also develop a good understanding of who the customers are. So what we've done on projects is often have all the different teams come to the regular show and tells where we talk about what we've started uncovering. And then in the design stage, when you might be working on sketches, maybe ideas for certain screens, screen flows, prototypes, maybe looking at branding and the design, the voice of all the other teams who will be involved in the delivery and implementation is really important, because then you start getting feedback. And this is feedback from internal teams, people who will be implementing and building this, but also feedback from users. You know, you use your prototype to test things out quite quickly. And one thing that often gets ignored here, and we face problems later on during implementation, is content. So in the past, you know, a lot of designers would just use lorem ipsum content, test it out quickly, and then later on, when the content editors start adding real content, it messes up all your front-end design. So what we're trying to do increasingly is test with real content to start with, even in your prototypes. And you get feedback before you then move to the next stage of delivery and working quite closely with the development team. So I think, yeah, it's sort of roughly the process: uncovering the problem, addressing the problem, and delivering the solution. So, and you can do this at a small scale quite quickly in a short sprint, or you can do this over a multi-month or multi-year project. But it's important to stay flexible, to stay agile, and keep going back and iterating throughout the process.
I can see it's very much about treating the cause and not the symptoms of it. It's getting to the root cause of the way things should happen. And from a developer's perspective, I personally love this process because I'm not rewriting code. I'm not re-engineering things that weren't thought about in a more deep and meaningful way initially, because I think a lot of our audience will often have experienced the situation where they've written something, somebody makes a small change to the customer journey, which seems like a small change to the customer journey, which actually has a massive ripple effect on the way that the code in the code base works. You know, asynchronous things fire in different orders, all sorts of things. So to make, to have that initial part of the process where it's thought about really carefully as not an afterthought, because I think that's the problem, is that many of the time it's addressed when symptoms or problems start to appear, that then we now think we must address. And the ripple effect is much bigger than just addressing that one or two. It's the knockdown of time in everybody's time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think the one thing that you learn as a designer is also not to fall in love with your work. So get the bad ideas out of the way. You might come up with a prototype or solution that you think is amazing, will fix the user needs that have been identified. You put it in front of users or developers and they just tear it apart. And that can hurt. But it's important to do that because you need to, and that's why something like prototyping is quite good, because you've done it in a low effort, low commitment way. Get the bad ideas out there, get lots of different possible solutions, think out of the box before you start honing into, where you're, what you want to build.
So what I did want to ask you is, because I know that getting feedback from customers is important, can I not just put myself in the shoes of the customer and imagine exactly what it is? Sort of, okay, I'm the shopper, I would do this, and I'd probably want to do that.
It's tempting.
Is that the right approach?
It's tempting, but you're not the user. You might be the user, but you may not be the only user, and you're definitely not unbiased. So it is important. And I can see why customer interviews can be quite daunting for people, especially if you don't have a research team. You may not have a huge UX team, because there is that perception, and well-founded, that research can be quite expensive. And sure, we'd all love to have an unlimited budget to play with, but that's rarely the case. Then again, a limited budget is no excuse for not doing any research, because your products and your users deserve that. This might be guerrilla testing. It might be just a few interviews to start with. But what we often tend to ignore is that there might be a wealth of information that's already out there. Your analytics may not be set up in the right way, but they might give you some pointers, whether it's page views, it's drop-off rates, it's the time spent on different pages. So you can look at a lot of the analytics and data that might be out there already. You might have surveys that have gone out in the past. You might have feedback from customer services teams. So it's important to talk. If you can't always talk to your end customers, talk to people who talk to those end customers. So talk to your salespeople who might be getting feedback, who can probably share a wealth of information, as well as your customer support teams, your call centers and others. A lot of that might be anecdotal. It might not be conclusive from a data perspective, but it gives you something to start with. It gives you certain initial questions that you can probe a little bit more and start connecting the dots.
Yeah, no, I think the chances are you could probably come across new ideas as well as requests. It's not always problems. It's not always customers complaining about certain things. It's requesting things that you don't have. So it's a great source of that. And you're 100% right. I think one of the blockers for a lot of developerpreneurs or small agencies, two, 3-man bands, is that they have to focus their energy. They're generally more technically focused with a little bit of sales, and UX and analytics seem to be an add-on that you add if you can afford it. And I think the biggest problem there, and the misconception, is that can you not afford to do it? Should more be the question, because I think the long-term savings from applying UX correctly way outstrip any cost you would have initially incurred to do it the right way the first time. And that leads me on to my probably my last question, which is, does UX just do a little bit of research, make some recommendations, custom interviews, they hand off to tech to implement, check it at the end of it, and now we're done and dusted? Or is this more of a living process?
It's absolutely a living process. So it is iterative. It has to be collaborative. The whole project, the whole process can live and die on the amount of collaboration. And I'm not a fan of the big bang handover approach. We have a lot of templates out there for handover documents and handover specifications, but actually it is much more collaborative than that, and it's not like a fixed handover point. So early on, like I mentioned earlier in the discovery, during the brainstorming stage, the designer may be leading things, the research side of things, the uncovering problems, working with different stakeholders. And as you go through to designing solutions, it's absolutely important for the development team to get involved, to provide feedback, provide input, spotting holes in those designs, or the way some features may be incorporated, because you get a sneak peek into what's coming down the pipeline. And you jointly work on specifications together. So in the past, designers would often just write up the specifications, hand it over to developers, but now you can write it up together to make sure it's fit for purpose, to make sure it reflects a joint understanding of where things are from an interface and design perspective, but also in terms of the implementation. So it has to be an ongoing collaborative discussion, and it doesn't need to be very time consuming. So we do this all the time. The first time we build some prototypes of some ideas before you share it with the client, quickly run your developer through it to test out the logic, test out any pitfalls, to give feedback on whether it works across different screen sizes, for instance. So, there could be a problematic approach, or there could be something in the backend that affects a different part of the whole system that you were not aware of. So all of this can be uncovered early on. So rather than waiting for the handover stage.
Yeah. No, I think, if the world has definitely gone into an agile way of working with lean processes, where you develop your MVP and then you iteratively increase the functionality of the system. So it makes perfect sense that every time you iterate, it requires UX as it requires UI. And that streamlines the process for development after that. You're not redeveloping, you're building the right thing based on the feedback of not only clients, but your analytics, what that details are telling you. And it just makes that smooth process of rolling forward with your development. I think it's, yeah. Well, I'm cognizant of the time. I think we're probably reaching towards the end. So Meera, thank you very much for the time you've given us. It really does, it's hugely valuable. I think it's one of those things that, as I mentioned earlier, is an oversight in many developments, where I'm probably going to get shot by my fellow techies, but it's probably the most important function within the development lifecycle, because it makes sure you build the right thing at the right time, which just saves costs and, sends us all home for a nice early weekend. No late nights fixing problems and the likes. So Dan, I'll hand over to you. I'm not sure if we've had any questions.
Got a couple of ones here to ask. I just want to quickly also echo what you've said, David. Big thanks to both of you. It was incredibly insightful, even kind of from my perspective as well, working from a marketing side. And I think a good kind of place to get started is, you were talking earlier about the value of analytics. So it'd be good to know a little bit more about that. And I think this is a nice question for you. So do UX teams work with analytics teams to sort out funnel or bounce rate problems, and maybe, learn a bit more about, again, how we do it at Cyberduck would be interesting as well.
Yeah. So you do have to work together, and sometimes it's often the same person working on it. So there's a lot of, your analytics essentially looks at transactional and behavioral data, and the source of that is your systems, right? Your website. While from a UX research perspective, your source of information is the customer. So you have to work hand in hand, because what analytics do is often showcase or highlight the problem areas. But what it doesn't do is look at the why behind it. Why is this a problem area? And to do that, you need to be able to speak to people where you can go a bit deeper into why that's happening. So you might find your analytics telling you that 90% of your users are going to this section while ignoring the other bits of it. And your UX research will help you dig deeper into why, because you need to understand the why before you find ways to test it out. And then you can still work hand in hand with analytics, because then you might come up with a few ideas, maybe do some A/B testing, and analytics can help support around feedback from that A/B testing. And it's sort of like a loop. So you work hand in hand to understand the what and the why.
Yeah,
no, that's a brilliant answer. Sorry, David, were you going to hop in there as well?
Yes, I was going to hop in there, and I think that's spot on, Meera. The other element I wanted to mention is uplift. Is that even when you are doing the right thing, so if you've analyzed that there is a problem with a specific workflow, you need to have some type of KPI to register the uplift and the efforts, to measure the efforts of the effect of your efforts. And I think that's where the analytics and the UX go hand in hand. Is you've got a baseline from your analytics, you make the calculated changes, and your analytics basically validates what you've done is correct, because you can't keep going back to your customers and quizzing them on the same issues. So you'll get their initial feedback, but you'll make sure after the fact that what you have done has made a tangible effect on the system.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, obviously we've been talking a lot about customers from in this session, so it'd be good to know, again, looking maybe beyond B2C or retailers, like, is this approach limited to customer focused sites, or should B2B, more B2B or B2G companies also be thinking about UX more?
I think it's everyone. So the U in UX is users, and they could be your external users, your customers, but they could also be your internal users. So often when we work on website projects, on CMSs, what we tend to focus on is the end user's experience at the front end of the website. But the CMS users are often ignored. The admin, who's the content editor, the content creator, who might have to play around with the CMS. And we need to be looking at that as well. So we often ignore the admin side of things. And I think treating them just like your end users, speaking to them, understanding their pain points, what they might struggle with, and understanding how that impacts their workflows and processes will help get that buy-in for needing to look at internal users as well.
Yeah, that's great. I've got a really interesting question here as well. Is what's the most important skill or skills that developers need, from your perspective, Meera, to work well with UX designers?
It's quite a generic thing, but I think openness and curiosity, and just that willingness to listen, to find out, because speaking to users, speaking to your customers, it's all about developing that empathy of looking at it from someone else's perspective. So I think it's key in collaborating in your design work, in your development work, to be able to build on that empathy, to be open to learning from lots of different teams, I think. I don't know if you had any other thoughts on this, David?
Yeah, no, 100%. From a technical standpoint, I think the reality is it's probably one of the synergies that's also really important, is that UX doesn't stay permanently in the sphere of UX practitioners. It's a slightly different thing, because developers, for example, have learned a programming language. A programming language. Now, it would be very difficult, obviously, for a UX practitioner to pick up programming, even though they will to a small degree, because they'll see as you're tweaking interfaces and things like that. But I think there's way more pollination, if I can call it that, from the UX side to the development side, where developers will pick up, like those patterns you were talking about, Meera, is like, that's the way it should be done, where it comes to a point where they don't even need UX. Well, don't need UX. What I'm saying is they can implement a lot of things themselves, because they've done it repeatedly and they realize, okay, don't create a drop down like that, do it this way for the flows, or this is the best design pattern for it, which then again increases the efficacy of the entire development team. So I think that the biggest thing is developers, and I agree with you, need to be open to what UX is telling them. You know, a lot of the time developers can be quite opinionated. I think we're techies are,
which is fine, David, and I think it works both ways.
Yeah.
You know, I know designers who probably are quite guarded about feedback as well, and so you need to be open to working and with other teams to be able to receive feedback as well. So it works both ways. I think this leaving your ego at the door and
exactly,
listening and collaborating.
spot on. Couldn't have said it better.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And I know during my pre-CyberDuck days, I've had instances of both, seeing a website that is, you haven't been collaborating together properly. And so the UX designers see a website and they've got their head in their hands because it's all been done wrong. But then also you have developers who will say, they'll be handed something and say, we can't do this, that's impossible. So I think that's such an important thing about that collaboration from early stages. But I think that's quite a nice way to lead on to our last question is, how do you get stakeholder buy-in for, I think, both putting the time and effort into UX, but also trying to make it more of a collaborative process rather than having these silos between teams? It'd be good to get both, I think, your perspectives on this last question.
I think personally it's a common thing that comes up in a lot of our client projects, that talking to stakeholders, getting buy-in and articulating the value of UX covers all the stuff we talked about in the beginning, the linking it to actual business metrics, the customers you're losing out, the frustration, the lack of conversions, the impact it's having on people's journeys. Through user research, you have documented feedback from users on what they find frustrating. There might be whole elements, whole segments of the audience base that you might be excluding. We talk about the purple pound. By not being accessible, you are actively excluding a whole group of people with disabilities, with access needs, etc. So there are actual business costs to this. So I think what is often hard, it's easier often to get stakeholder buy-in. What's harder is the second part of your question, Dan, which is around the silos and trying to get everybody in on a shared goal, which is difficult. It's a skill, and it might need a few different approaches. So, you know, at the start of a project, what we do is typically get everybody in the room together. So we start off in the same place with the same understanding. We run workshops and exercises, icebreakers on getting everybody to the same page. So we all start being invested in that same common purpose. And then through projects, throughout the project, you have regular show and tells where you're again building on that understanding. You might do individual interviews, you might do workshops with specific departments where you try and link back what they're working on to the project and the impact it would have on their work and how it might make their work better. So there are lots of different ways to do this. David, if you wanted to.
I'm going to be cold and calculated in the one, which is stakeholders and shareholders. It often comes down to cash. What is my return on investment? I know that seems very calculated, but yeah, the reality is the joy of UX's effect is completely measurable by using analytics we chatted about earlier. It's not subjective. You know, design can be a very subjective thing. I like the site, I don't like the site, I like the color, I don't like the color. UX is extremely measurable. You've put a process in place, you've fixed it, you've measured the uplift, and that will return, you know, your ROI. Basically, you'll be getting better processes, better conversions, happier teams, etc. So I think for stakeholders, it's not a difficult sell once you can actually present the KPIs, as Meera said. Once you show them this was a problem, this was the uplift, this is where we've saved or made money. In terms of the siloing, I think there it's actually a sort of team morale and a working together, because nobody wants to do things several times. There's nothing more frustrating than doing the same job 3 times. And UX is principle in making sure that doesn't happen. You know, if you get it right from the first time, you do it once and you do it correctly. So I think that will probably help to bridge between departments. Is, you know, we all want to do it effectively once and move on to the next exciting project.
Brilliant. That's a great way to wrap things up. So we have gone a little bit over the 40 minutes, but just got a couple last things to say, and then I'll let everyone get off. But our next session is going to be in a couple of weeks' time. We've touched on accessibility a little bit today, but we're going to be going out another step deeper and about why all developers need to understand accessibility. It is a topic that is of a passion for everyone at CyberDuck, so it's going to be again a brilliant session. We'll give you an email just before this, so you have all the right times and everything to join that. If you haven't done already, we do have our Laravel white paper. So this will touch upon lots of the stuff that we've been talking about in this series of webinars and give you a bit more insight into the way we work as a Laravel agency and as a digital transformation agency as well. And that's it. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you so much, Meera and David, for all your fantastic insights. And I look forward to seeing everyone for our next session in a couple of weeks' time.